Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Rosie here. Today, it's going to be a Dead by Daylight video. We haven't done one of those in a little bit. Uh, Today we're going to be discussing the early game mechanic that was announced 6+ months ago, and we still know nothing about because the devs haven't released anything about it. Uh, this early game mechanic has just got to get here, alright? And the reason for that is the idea that the devs are going for here is that the survivors are all powerful early game and the killers are all powerful late game. And this is just 100% not the case right now. Well, except the first one is true. If you play against a 4-man SWF, the reality of the situation is that the survivors are so fucking powerful and busted early game that effect trickles and bleeds in to late game. That's how busted it is, okay? For example, if you spawn in on Mother's Dwelling, or Ormond, Larry's, any stupid map with, like, busted tiles, or just big, spawn in at Larry's, you walk over, you waste about, you walk over, have about 40 seconds patrolling the map to get to the other side of the gen. Two survivors are on the gen, boom, pop, discordance, easy, Killer Bane, retarded, what are you doing? So, you wasted 44 seconds going over there, and they popped the gen, because they had two people on it. You find two survivors, okay? You injure one, hit the other, boom, you down the guy, and then all of a sudden, ding, ding, two more pop, because the two other people are now catching up. That takes about 40 seconds to down the guy, and then boom, your first down, three gens are done upon your first out of Larry's. Okay? This situation right here creates what you call, it lessens the window for killers to do snowball pressure. Okay, first of all, the 12 hook condition, as soon as that first generator popped, there was no fucking chance in hell the killer had to actually do the 12 hook win condition of the game. That died. But the reason, see, this is why Otofu is so fucking dumb. The reason that the early game and them slamming 3 gens immediately not only lessens the window for killers to do snowball pressure, but it also, like, leads to like, when do you start slugging as killer earlier? The earlier they pop gens, the earlier the killer is forced to slug. And I love how Otofu, if you watch True Talent versus Otofu goes, "Wow, snowball pressure, bro, easy. You must get good at killer if you're going to apply snowball pressure." And then True Talent goes, "Forced to slug." Like, you're forced to do it. It's a very different look at the game. True Talent understands that the win condition of the game is to actually, like, hook every survivor 3 times. That's the true. Not really. I mean, I don't consider that the win condition. I consider 4Ks to be the win condition. But, like, the game was designed that every survivor gets 3 hooks, so you can understand why slugging can be considered a loophole to some people. But, like, that's the state of the game now. Okay? And basically, as you pop gens, like, and then you get your second down, and then there's one gen left after your second down. You have, like, so, like, you have the Swift got the guy off the hook, healed him, then you have another hook. You, like, one guy's hooked, and then the 3 people are uninjured, and one guy has 1 hook on him. You're not gonna be able to snowball pressure that, Otofu. You're just not gonna be able to do it. If they're competent, like this whole lie of snowball pressure being viable is because here's where that started. Okay, well, basically, people are at the red ranks that don't deserve to actually be there. Okay, so what happens is when they make like 1 or 2 bad decisions, a good killer is able to capitalize on that and do snowball pressure. You're not gonna actually be able to snowball a Swift that's making good decisions. That's just something that's just not gonna happen. Okay, so like, what I'm saying here is that the early game gens decrease the window to actually do that on against people that might not have even been able to be in that situation in the first place. So you have a decreased window to actually do the slugging. This is why the early game matters. Oh, fucking Tofu, you dummy. Okay, so survivors are OP, their strong early game trickles into the late game to where they still have the advantage and they never lose it. Okay, that's the problem. That's the problem the devs currently face. I don't know, the devs are researching Ruin Undying right now, so I don't know where their heads are at, but the real problem with the game is the gens. It's always been the gens. Okay, moving on. So, The next thing I want to say, if anyone has ever seen Scott Junn's trial warm-up video, this came out a while back, Scott Junn's idea is too weak. I have an entire video about it, about why it's too weak, but the reason that it's too weak, I'll just go through it again here very slightly. Scott Junn's idea of the trial warm-up is that gen speeds are horribly reduced until the killer triggers the chase mechanic. Okay, once the killer is in a chase with somebody, then the gens go back to normal, and that's his only change. That's not strong enough, okay? Because sometimes you spawn right next to people, and then you're in a chase immediately, and then you'll down them in 40 seconds, and then boom, there's still 2 gens done. The gen speeds are just too fast for this idea to actually be good. Like, a reduction in gen speeds for about 10-20 seconds is not going to help save this game, okay? And if you want to go back to my scenario about Larry's and Mother's Dwelling, and then apply the trial warm-up to it, okay, so they have a reduction in gen speeds. I forget the numbers that he said. I do the math in that video, but, like, the numbers that he said, and then a 40-second chase on Larry's being nice. 40 seconds is always nice on Larry's. They should be able to kite on Larry's for about 70 seconds if they're good. But so you get a 40-second kite on Larry's, another 40 seconds to patrol. 40 seconds is more than enough for 2 survivors to complete a generator. So if there's 2 survivors on it with the I forget the fucking number he had, but the point is, like, the killer could still get a hook, and then there's probably still 2 gens done anyway. Or about to be done. So one pop goes the weasel, it isn't going to save you. Okay, and then any good SWF could power through Ruin to take care of any generators. And the trial warm-up is not a good enough solution to slow down a competent Swift. Okay, it's just not. And that's just being nice, because I forget the numbers. I don't want to say 3 gens would pop on his idea anyway, but not understand the full numbers of his idea. Just my overall point in that video is that the gen speeds are so bad, and the kiting is so bad, that there is still, like, grounds for survivors securing a strong enough early game to trickle down into the late game. This would not fix the problem, was my overall idea about Scott Junn's trial warm-up. So this solution, too weak, it's not going to work. Okay, next. But we need to discuss something, okay? The dev's idea is that the survivors are stronger than the killer early game because the killer speeds up late game, okay? Now, again, as much as we want to sit here and bitch, you have to acknowledge the fact that if you don't understand that killer does speed up late game, you don't play killer. And, like, if you're not playing killer correctly if you don't acknowledge that killer does speed up late game. So, as we move forward with this, you have to understand why the early game can never be killer favored, okay? The early game can never be killer favored because if the killer starts winning the game too fast, the survivors don't really have a hope in hell. Okay, if you have there have been many situations where like once the killer started, like, you could start making Swift do things, and like if you make the Swift go get the rescue, you make the Swift go pick up a slug. That's where your ruin value starts to come in. Okay, so like once the killer does get going, the game does slow down. The problem is, getting going with 1 gen left is definitely not enough time to secure anything unless you're going to slug everybody and they make bad decisions. Okay, but the early game can't be killer favored. That's one thing we're not going to touch in this particular video. Okay, we're not going to try to make the early game killer favored. Okay, the idea here is that everything wrong with the early game gets fixed, okay? And this is through a combination of ideas, okay? Personally, if I was going to do the early game mechanic, I would lab all of my ideas that I have here at once together, okay? I would add all of my ideas at once together and see what it does, okay? But going forward, we're trying not to make the early game killer favored, okay? A very lazy way out to do that is to make Corrupt Intervention a base mechanic in the game. Corrupt Intervention is a perk that blocks the 3 furthest gens from your spawn location. Okay, I would actually change it if you were going to make it base to block the 3 closest generators to the survivor spawn location. That's what I would do with it, but this is a very lazy way out. I don't really advocate for this, because I feel like this is just a very, very lazy way to fix the early game. And even so, it doesn't really fix the early game, because again, survivors can have a lot of counterplay to this perk. They can stuff it out with stealth, or if they get a bad spawn, if the spawn of the Corrupt Intervention is bad, if you keep it exactly the way it is, they're still like ideas for them to secure early game advantage. Again, why them securing early game advantage is a problem is because it bleeds into the late game. Okay, and if we live in a game where the devs say the killers should not be expected to keep all 5 gens up the entire match, I don't know how we live in a game where the survivors just shouldn't get down the entire time. It should be both. The killer should expect to get downs in a match, and the survivors should expect to get gens done in a match. Okay, but if you make Corrupt Intervention base and block those 3 furthest gens, you now need a new Corrupt Intervention. Okay, so here would be my new Corrupt Intervention. New Corrupt Intervention. Upon the generator reaching 70%, that Tinkerer synergy, though, the entity will intervene and block the generator. First 2 gens would be a 10-second block, third and fourth gen would be a 20-second block, and the 5th gen would be a 30-second block. Corrupt Intervention can only affect each generator once per match. So if they block off the 10-second one and then leave it, and then Ruin regresses to 0, and that's the gen they hit late game, it would not apply the 30-second block to it. That would be my new Corrupt Intervention if that's what they do decide to do. Okay? So there you go. Corrupt Intervention only affect one. So this is really not the thing I've been advocating for. But, like, if you do decide to go the lazy route, this is what they could do. Knowing these devs, the change will look something like this. Okay, but here's my more original ideas, okay? My first one is a mechanic called Thirst to Kill, okay? At the beginning of the match, the killer gains 50% movement speed. This speed is lost upon entering a chase, okay? Basically, this is my answer to Scott Junn's trial warm-up, because instead of hindering the survivor, it would boost the killer. Okay, this is the same effect that the early game mechanic is going for, but Scott Junn's early game mechanic is going for is in here. The killer feels boosted because they move around the map faster at the beginning of the game, and the effect is they would find the survivors at the gen around the same time. The survivors just wouldn't have to sit through the annoying reduction in gen speeds. Okay, and they also wouldn't know when it was over unless that they are a Swift. Because if you have Scott Junn's trial warm-up mechanic, and then all of a sudden the gen meter shoots off and you don't even hear a tear radius, you know the killer's in a chase halfway across the map. So, so Scott Junn's, another criticism of that is it gives the survivors too much information. If you add a Thirst to Kill mechanic, it ideally should be able to, help every killer move and get started. This would be a massive buff for killers like Trapper and Myers. They could they could run around the map, set up really, really quickly, and then still apply some pressure, okay, before the gens are even done. Okay, so this would be a good mechanic. However, it's not good enough to stand on its own. As I said, the Scott Junn's early game mechanic is too weak, okay? And just kind of reworking it into this scenario right here just isn't good enough. Okay, here's where we have our survivor debuffs, okay? My next mechanic, this as Thirst to Kill's partner in crime, is called Weakened Spirit. At the beginning of the match, all survivors are unable to use their items, so no brand new part at the beginning of the game. That would help. Receive any buffs to action speed, negate the Prove Thyself, and they're afflicted by blindness, negate Object of Obsession is what that does, and the exhaustion status effect to negate every exhaustion perk that they have. This effect lasts until a survivor is hooked or performs a safe hook rescue. Okay, so there you go. At the beginning of the game, no brand new part, no toolboxes, nothing to boost the gen speeds, and nothing to boost gen speeds at all. No Prove Thyself, no nothing, no leader, no nothing like that at the beginning of the game. No, the blindness status effect, because Object, that's what you do with blindness. You can take it out of everybody's add-on kit and just add it to Weakened Spirit. And so that way, if they somehow pop a gen before you even get there, the Detective's Hunch user will not be able to go and cleanse 3 of your totems. And the exhaustion. So they don't have Dead Hard. No survivor gets Dead Hard for their first chase. This effect lasts until a survivor is hooked or performs a safe hook rescue. Okay, so basically what this does is, again, combined with more map changes and reduction to these loops, it will negate their huge early game kite times, while leaving those kite times available for later. And how you do that is to negate their exhaustion perks. The exhaustion perks are how they fucking cheese so much of this advantage. And I think this would be decent. So you have, if again, you can even decide to combine all 3. So you have Corrupt Intervention blocking the 3 furthest gens from the killer. You have Thirst to Kill increasing their movement speed, and you have Weakened Spirit to negate exhaustion perks at the beginning of the game. So this would force the survivors to actually use skill to kite the killer at the beginning of the game. Stealth wouldn't be good enough because the killer would still retain 50% movement speed until they've actually found a chase. So you can't just stealth out the entirety of Corrupt Intervention without the killer receiving a boost of some kind. Okay, so the biggest difference between mine and Scott Junn's mechanic here is that the survivors are directly hit. The survivors are directly afflicted with status effects and shit early game that will affect their early game kites. Okay, once their early game kites are directly affected by the early game mechanic, they go down faster, they hook faster, and then again, Weakened Spirit is denied as soon as the killer hooks the survivor, or they perform a safe hook rescue once the game is going. It makes no sense for a survivor to have Weakened Spirit in the mid game. So basically, it's really good for those first few chases because you can get your barbecue aura to go to the next survivor with Weakened Spirit, and it means so like your first chases will not have exhaustion perks in them. You can damn well be assured that your first chases will not have exhaustion perks in them, which will be good for getting you started and dealing with the insanity that they have before you. Okay. With the, like, again, I still don't think, even with all of this shit, including the Corrupt Intervention base, I don't think the early game is killer favored, okay? If the survivors can abuse long wall jungle gyms and the shit that they have at their disposal, there is enough precedence for them securing enough early game pressure on the killer to keep the game exciting for the late game, where it actually feels like the two sides are butting heads, okay? Because the idea here is that the late game is a struggle for both sides, but you can only do that by nerfing the early game. Okay? And those are my 3 brainstorming ideas. Okay? I thought of these ideas at work when I was bored. So they're very, like, not well thought out and well developed. But if you have your own suggestions about your own mechanics or going off mine, just type those in the comments, boys. Alright, GG's. That's my early game mechanic. I think this would do wonders for slowing down the survivors in the early game. GG's, lads.